go. Should be live on YouTube, and you can attend via Zoom. So thank you for joining us. My name is Kyle Doyle. I'm the manager of asset management at the Sunshine Coast Regional District. We're here to talk about Lee Bay. It's a summer 2020 capital funding update for the wastewater treatment service in Area A. Just going to do a bit of housekeeping. Joining us today, we have myself, Shane Walkie, who is the manager of utility services, and we have Director Lee, who is the Area A electoral representative. There's two formats to join us this evening. You can be watching on YouTube live, or you may be watching at a different time. You may also be joining us via Zoom. If you are on Zoom tonight, we're offering a few ways to engage with us and provide feedback. There are three options on your Zoom interface that allow you to get a hold of us, and two of those will work and one may not. So if you look at the bottom of your screen, if you mouse over your screen, there is a Q&A button there. That is the preferred method if you want to ask a question during the presentation. You can click on that, type in your question. It will be presented for staff to answer it at any time. Those questions will be logged, and at the end of the meeting, I will read them aloud so anyone who's on YouTube can participate, or at least see the participation. The second way to participate is you can raise your hand, and that's in the I think it's in the participant list there. You can click on yourself and say raise your hand. We'll get to the raised hands, preferably in order. At the end of the session, there's a period where we'll allow questions. The third method, which you may choose to use, is the chat function. I can't guarantee that we'll get to those questions. There's sometimes a lot of chatter, and it scrolls up before we get a chance to see them. So if you are on Zoom, please use the question and answer feature or raise your hand if you'd like to participate. Those of you that raise your hand, you will be given the opportunity to speak. Your voice and image, if you choose, will be transmitted and recorded on YouTube. If you have any issues with your being recorded, we can edit out of the video later, possibly. Okay, so with that, we're going to get into the presentation. Let me get my screen shared here. I think that's up on the screen for everyone now. So this is the, as I said, the Wastewater Treatment Summer 2020 Capital Funding Update for the Lee Bay Wastewater Service. If you're joining us today, you likely own a property within the map on the screen. If you do not, you're welcome to join us, but please let's keep questions to this service area today. There will be an opportunity for each of the 15 services to have a engagement session and ask questions related to their service. It's been a long day, and it is very smoky. I hope everyone's staying healthy. I will be drinking a lot of water throughout this meeting. My voice is going. So today we're going to summarize the previous review. If you attended any of the engagement sessions we hosted over the last winter, this is information that we've already covered. If not, it'll get everyone up to the same place. I will go over the capital funding update, which includes the process that we go through to create these capital funds, and it will illustrate the specific funding for the Lee Bay wastewater service area. And then we're going to talk about what's coming up next broadly, and we'll take questions at the end. These presentations generally take about 20 to 25 minutes, so if you have a question and it pops up, we'll get to it soon. Going forward. This is just a slide summarizing the previous review we've done. The process started in 2019 with a high-level wastewater service review, and this was a review of all the wastewater services in the SCRD. This was accompanied by the creation of asset management plans for each wastewater service. These were specific to the service and were an opportunity for staff to gather all the information and pertinent details in one place. These are published on your wastewater services website, which you can find at www.scrd.ca/Lee-Bay. The website will be posted at the end of the slides. After we presented our plans and our review to the board, we went out and engaged the community. This was a bit of a whirlwind in the summer, or in the winter, I should say. We got a lot of feedback. It was wonderful to get out there in the community, and in retrospect, I missed the ability to go out and talk to people in person. Um, After that, we started to produce some fact sheets to help provide residents with a quick glance of the information we were seeing and what was driving our thoughts and processes. And then we went into the 2020 budget season with a revision that we presented to the board. A rate adjustment was made, and some user rates and frontage fees were adjusted to reflect the information that came out of this review. So in more details, some of the key findings of this 2019 wastewater service review, and this is broadly speaking, but the existing revenue that we're collecting for these services is unsustainable. Most of the wastewater services, the operations budget often was greater than the revenues generated from user fees, and the contributions to reserve funds were therefore deferred frequently. At the end of the day, the future capital expenditures were not adequately planned for, and the ratio of capital reserves to future capital expenses was too low. Just to recap, previously we collected two series of fees from all wastewater users. We collected a frontage fee from every parcel in the service area, and we collected a user fee from every parcel that was connected to the wastewater service. So if there was a house or a structure on the parcel that was generating wastewater and connected, you were charged a user fee as well. These two fees combined to form the operating budget, which funded the annual operating expenditures and also contributed to the capital and operating reserves where possible. This process we found to be a little bit convoluted and not transparent. So one of the key outcomes from this wastewater service review, in alignment with financial policy, we've decoupled user fees and frontage fees so that the user fee revenues only fund operation and maintenance expenses, and frontage fees only fund capital expenses. This promotes transparency and clarity, and it allows a lot of ease on our end as far as the accounting goes. So all in all, this was a positive move. What that did do in some cases, where the frontage fee was subsidizing the operations budget, it did result in a disproportionate increase in the user fee related to the operations budget. So we followed that up with an extensive review of operation and maintenance requirements for each service area. This was included an audit of operation and maintenance activities. We revised the operations and maintenance budget of every service area to ensure that there was the adequate funding to facilitate the work that needed to be done for each service area. We established reserve targets for every service area to make sure that there was always funds available when work needed to be done. And this is a process that we'll continue to do annually, and we'll just make sure we're on target. And then get into today's conversation, we developed capital funding models to plan for future capital expenses. So what we have now is the current configuration of our funding model. We have user fees, which fund operations and maintenance budget and also contribute to the operations and maintenance reserve. And we have frontage fees, which separately fund the capital expenditures budget and contribute to the capital reserve. Much simpler to understand. A common question, just to get out in front of what we heard from the feedback from the public, and maybe not everyone got an answer to this if they had it in their head. Why do we need an operating reserve? Obviously, unforeseen repairs can exceed your annual operating budget. And it's important to understand that as a regional district, and I believe most municipalities, you're not allowed to borrow for operational expenses. They have to be covered by revenue. So any operating reserve that we have established and that is there is only used for the service area it's collected from. So there is no risk of your fees subsidizing another service area. They'll be used only for the Lee Bay wastewater service area. So coming out of last year's service review, this is the impact on the wastewater rates. The Lee Bay wastewater budget was reduced by 11%, and user fees remained flat, and frontage fees remained flat. So this service area in particular did not see a change last year. It was a board level decision to on the recommendation of staff, I believe, to not increase the frontage fees last year, to mitigate the increase, as there were a lot of service areas that had um, not the same story. There was a significant user fee increase for many service areas last year. So this year we're hoping to address the capital funding issues going forward, and chart a path where we can create a sustainable funding plan for the long future. So I'd like to highlight that we got a lot of feedback last year, I guess this year too. We analyzed, as a result of that feedback, we heard we were a bit too conservative, and so we went back through historical SCRD contract data where we could, and we wanted to refine our long-term capital model and make sure there was no unnecessary expenses being captured. We reduced our engineering allowance estimates by 3%. We reduced our contingency for capital projects by 15%. So that brought some of our estimates down. We heard that the residents are more tolerant of accruing debt over time. So where possible, we considered financing larger portions of projects. It's not always possible, but we definitely took into consideration. And then one of the big comments we got was the uncertainty around future rate increases was causing some financial anxiety, and that's understandable, especially considering the magnitude of some of the increases we were discussing last year. So to alleviate some of those fears, we're proposing to the board this year a 5-year rate structure proposal. And what this will look like, you'll see at the end of the presentation, but the concept is to provide the residents advance notice of rate increases, and every year we would add on to the 5th year so that there are no immediate increases that are coming up that can't be planned for. Some more things that we revised over the last year. We updated the savings and borrowing rates to match the current rates, obviously. Part of the annual review process. We'll be doing that consistently. But we also introduced a variable borrowing rate based on the term of the loan. So some infrastructure has a longer lifespan, and we anticipate that we can look at maybe a longer term loan to flatten the expenses. And some have shorter. So based on the term of the anticipated loan, we have different borrowing rates. We also heard that our estimates on construction inflation were far too high. And we took that to heart. We went through our data, and we thought of ways we could reduce it while still remaining faithful to the information we had in front of us. And so we introduced a variable construction cost index. And what this is it looks at the period in time in which the construction is anticipated to take place, and it applies a variable construction inflation rate based on how far ahead in the future the construction is due to occur. So you can see on the table in front of you there, if it's in the next 1 to 10 years, we have a 1.9% rate, and so on. And all this information was taken from a construction cost estimator software called RS Means, and they publish regional, federal, provincial construction cost estimates that show historical construction prices over time, and there's an index there that we reference, and that's the best information we have. So just to review the some of the factors going into the process of creating a capital model and funding infrastructure. We are in a regional district, and provincial legislation dictates that service areas in regional districts can be funded only by the participants of that service area. There's no outside residents or parcels that are taxed to finance the work that needs to be done or the costs that are incurred. So that means that costs are shared by a relatively small number of people. Lee Bay Wastewater Service Area is one of the largest ones on the Sunshine Coast. Some have as few as 5 or 6 parcels in them. I think Lee Bay has 178 off the top of my head. All infrastructure degrades over time. Everyone knows this. The roof on your houses don't last forever, unfortunately. And as time goes by, we see reduced performance and higher maintenance costs. And so, it's pretty common knowledge that if we keep our infrastructure in good shape and we replace it on time, we have the cheapest possible maintenance costs. And then obviously infrastructure costs do inflate over time. You can see this in your residential construction, but the dollar value we have today is not the same as it will be in the future. So we have to consider the inflating costs. Now, just a brief summary of the method we took to create these models. We looked at the upcoming expenditures. We developed a timeline of the anticipated replacement for each component of the wastewater service using the estimated useful lives of the infrastructure. These useful lives were determined from engineering best practices and information we had in our own, from our historical experience. Where possible, to reduce the effect of inflation and keep cost estimates as accurate as possible. We use the most recent replacement cost estimates. So if we replace a system with similar infrastructure, we would use the infrastructure costs from that instead of using an old estimate and bring it forward into future times. We inflated these values to future values using the construction cost indexes, as I spoke about earlier. And we included debt financing costs where we anticipated debt would be accrued. And then on the flip side, if we establish a reserve balance, we definitely consider the accrual of annual interest. Some of the key points here, real quickly, is that we did use the most recent replacement cost estimates wherever we can. And as there's a lot of systems that are starting to come up to term for replacement of significant components, and we'll be able to populate our database with more and more recent replacement costs as this happens, as we get engineering estimates and that sort of thing. So we'll continue to do that as we review this on an annual basis. And just a reminder, there's three main components of your wastewater service. You have your wastewater treatment plant, which everyone has a pretty easy time remembering. We anticipate those to last about 50 years. You have a disposal system, which normally has a 40-year life if it's taken care of. And you have a collection system, which we anticipate will last between 80 and 85 years. So just get right into it here. Gonna go through a few slides here, just get an idea of how this happens. So the first slide we have is the 30-year anticipated capital expenditure for the wastewater service area. And we can see we have coming up a standby generator. We anticipate needing to replace a fence. And we have a treatment plant in around 2050. So the first few costs are fairly small, and then you can see the treatment plant is a significant expense in the future. So if we carry on the historical rate increase that we've seen for the Lee Bay wastewater service, we have, since the SCRD taken over, there has been an average 22 cent a year increase. Obviously, this hasn't happened every year, but that is the average. What I've charted on this same graph as previously is the reserve balance we would anticipate over the next 30 years. And for most of that 30 years, you could argue that we're doing pretty well. As we get to the point we need to replace the treatment plant, there's approximately 20% balance of the reserve of the anticipated cost. And that's going to drive a need to borrow money. And when you borrow money, you need to pay it back. And what we anticipate as the debt payment associated with borrowing that money creates a pretty large spike in the frontage fee. So on the screen here now would be the gray line is your reserve balance that we anticipate over 30 years. And the yellow line is the historical frontage fee based on the average 22 cents a year increase. When the construction occurs in 2049, the frontage fee is anticipated to increase by over $2,200. Generally, when we're doing financial planning, having a large spike like this that's driven by debt is considered to be inequitable. It's definitely not appealing if I was looking to buy a home in 2045, but it's also, we want to get in a situation where everyone contributes on a flat rate basis when we take into account inflation. So this isn't ideal, obviously, so we need to come up with a solution that is a little bit more equitable for everyone as we consider this intergenerational equity in these assets. So now we've zoomed out from 30 years and we're looking at a 50-year timeline. We've introduced, I believe, the collection plant is, or sorry, the treatment plant is your first big spike at $6.7 million. And then we have a collection system and possibly a drain field, I believe, in 2060-ish. And then another part of the collection system coming up in 2065. These costs are definitely imposing when you look on a 50-year scale. And when we look at that same historical frontage fee increase, that second large expense drives another frontage fee increase. And we're looking at fees in 2060 that are over $6,000. They're literally off the chart at this time. Another thing to note before we move on is if you look at this gray line on the bottom that represents the reserve balance, you never end up, accumulating enough reserves to even come close to paying for any of these upcoming expenses. And we feel like 50 years is a pretty good timeline to plan for, because that makes sure we capture some big infrastructure. We're not just looking at a small window. We did consider a larger time frame of 75 years, but there becomes some more uncertainty. Technology changes, and it's impossible to plan for too far in the future. So we're not considering these next set of assets that we're going to replace, but it is something to think about when we look at where the reserve balance ends at the end of 50 years in the subsequent plans I'm going to show you. So what we're going to do now is go through, I believe I have 3 plans that we've looked at. We've looked at many, many more, and this should just give you an idea of some of the things we looked at and some of the challenges that we face when we're trying to forecast this financial planning. So this is the first plan, and this I believe represents the plan that we were originally considering. There's been some tweaks, but in an ideal world, as far as the financial side of things go, we ramp up to a situation where we can increase the annual rate by an amount equivalent to the Canadian Consumer Price Index, which is inflation basically. So in this case, we use 2.5% annual increase, which is not ideal. 2% is the target, but we found when we stop our increase at $902, we need to have a bit more inflation to make this plan work. This plan starts at $102 where you're at now in 2020, increases $200 every year until 2024, and then increases at 2.5% from there on. There is no debt accrued during this plan. So what I show here on this slide is the same plan in the green line. That's your frontage fee that we see across the 50 years. And the blue line represents the reserve balance. So we definitely are, accumulating a significant amount of reserve. And that was one of the objections we heard from the residents previously, is that, do we need to save up all the money to pay for things, or is it possible to get some debt? And so we looked at that. Unfortunately, with the stacking 3 large payments in this 50-year plan, it does present a bit of a challenge of finding a model that meets everyone's expectations. So this plan, again, is $200 a year for 4 years, and then a 2.5% increase every year beyond that. The next plan we looked at, and I believe this solves a lot of the complaints, is a little bit of a less aggressive increase on an annual basis. It's $100 from 2020 to 2031. So we go from $102 to $1,202. And from there on, we go on a 2% annual increase. And there is, again, no debt in the 50-year time frame. And if you look at the reserve balance here, it's similar to before, and we're keeping it above the anticipated costs. And it's not a bad thing, but I can understand how some people might think that's not fair. And so we then looked at maybe trying to massage this plan into a situation where we accumulate just enough, or enough to acquire some debt in 2049, 2050 for that treatment plant, and what happens after that. So again, we're trying to avoid any spikes at any point in the plan that are caused by debt repayment, but we did come up with a situation here, and this plan was basically, we targeted the reserve balance to be near the cost of the upcoming infrastructure, Um, we go up $100 a year for the next 6 years from 2020 to 2025. And then there's a 2% increase over that. And you can see when we get into the second large infrastructure project around 2059, there is a several $1,000 increase. Your reserves are depleted, your reserves never recover, and then we have to increase again. So this is not ideal. And it kind of tells us that if we're going to target having the reserves be below or at the anticipated construction prices in 2049, we'll have some spikes in the future from that. So we came up with an in-between between the second plan I showed you and this one, and that would be this plan here. We carry on our $100 a year increase for 2 more years. So instead of stopping at $602, we increase it until it's $802, and we take a 2% annual increase from there on. And in this scenario, there is a debt-driven increase forecast for 2066, and the reserve balance is not what I would consider a healthy reserve balance heading into the next part of the 50-year plan. As our horizon moves forward and we start to capture more of the projects that are coming up after this, it's easy to assume that we'll have more debt-driven increases with a reserve balance that low. Excuse me. So these are the 3 plans that we looked at. We looked at many more. There's iterations. We've increased by $50. We've looked at different inflationary rate increases. We looked at having steps of small increases now and then a flat rate and then small increases later. But it is, we're guided a little bit by the financial policy, which looks to reduce any of these spikes where possible, and it looks to have a rate that increases at the same rate of inflation. So there's only so many of these plans that we can produce that are actually compliant with our financial policy. So what I put on the board in front of you now, or your computer screen, or whatever you're participating on, is a comparison of those 3 plans as far as the frontage fee goes. You can see the yellow line is the historical plan, and it looks great until 30 years from now, and then it's obviously the worst plan. And unfortunately, a part of this is we can't change our mind halfway. If we don't increase it for 30 years, we're going to suffer the consequences. Whereas we look at the 3 plans that we presented today and talked about, the green plan being the first one. This one would generate no debt, have healthy reserve balances, and ensure that in 50 years the service is going to be in a situation where it's able to make the changes it needs to and afford the infrastructure. The brownish on my screen, it's a bit of a red color plan. It extends at a little bit less aggressive rate, and I think that provides some relief for the residents over the near future. It does increase to more than the plan 1 for a short period of time, but since it inflates at a lower rate, by the end of the plan we're paying less, and we're in a similar situation. Both those plans are very healthy from the perspective of a reserve balance. And then we have the purple plan, which plan 3, I shouldn't call it the purple plan, it's purple on my screen, taking a shorter period of increases and then enjoying a lower fee for a period of time, but we get to a situation at the end of the plan where we're having a jump in the fee, and you have to remember this plan does not consider outside the 50-year horizon and has a pretty low reserve balance at the end of it. So generally at this point in the presentation, I let you know that we're going to have a poll. Actually, generally I tell that at the beginning. And I'd like to get some feedback from anyone who's present. If you're on Zoom, you can participate. I'm just going to give one more summary of these plans to give you an idea. Because we're looking at proposing a 5-year rate structure to create some cost certainty, this is what those 3 plans would look like, including your user fee over the next 5 years. So You can see Plan 1, Plan 2, and Plan 3 there. Plan 2 and Plan 3 track along the exact same path, so as you would expect, the fees associated with those two plans for the next 5 years are the same. One of the advantages of choosing one of those plans is if we go with Plan 3 and we change our mind after 3 or 4 years, we can just keep going into Plan 2. So I'm just going to ask everyone who's here, if you'd like to participate, you'll see there's a poll on your screen. This isn't a bind-in poll. This will just allow ourselves and the board to get an idea of what the residents' feedback is. There will be weighed in consideration, but it definitely doesn't lock us into any particular plan. If you do see the poll, please feel free to just indicate which one you think is best for your neighborhood. Just gonna leave this up for a quick second, and we'll get going here in a minute. I just have to go fill my water glass up. Okay, thanks very much to everyone who participated. We had a 60-40 split between Plan 2 and Plan 3 based on resident feedback, and I'll pass that on to the directors when we convene with them. So going forward from here, we look to finalize this capital funding model. Just make sure we cross our T's and dot our I's, do a final review before we present to the board. Where possible, we'll continue to pursue grant opportunities for future work. Libe doesn't have any major projects coming up, but for the generator and the fence, if there are any grants that are available when they come up, we'll be sure to apply for them, as well as trying to get ahead of the treatment plant upgrade when it does happen. We will look to get a feasibility study and get as much information as possible. We're going to be presenting these rate structures to the board for consideration, and they'll make a decision on that. And then on an annual basis, we'll continue to review the operations and maintenance budget and refine our projection of maintenance costs and ensure that the reserve for that is appropriate. Just a quick conclusion. Our current rates are not financially sustainable. There's obviously multiple ways to finance this with consequences that vary depending on the choices we make. And by reviewing this on an annual basis, we'll make sure we maintain the most up-to-date information and our estimates as accurate as possible. So at this time, we'll take questions. I'll leave this screen up for a short period. I've heard complaints in the past that when the PowerPoint is up and we're doing resident feedback, if you choose to show up on the screen, it can interfere. So if you have any questions, feel free to check out the website for your specific service, which is the scrd.ca/lead-bay. You can also link to it from the Wastewater website that's posted below. And feel free to email at info@scrd.ca and they'll patch you through to me. I'm happy to talk to you about these things when I have time. So let me see what we have here. We have a few questions in the question and answer. So someone's asked, is it only Lee Bay residents impacted? Are any other areas of Pender Harbor / SCRD also impacted? If not, why? So yes, I would say Lee Bay is the least impacted currently. Having the largest or near the largest number of users has provided a lot more financial flexibility. To answer your question, we have 15 wastewater services that are managed by the SCRD. All 15 have been reviewed, and I'm hosting an information session every second night in this format to present the specific information. If you're curious, feel free to click through on the wastewater website there to another service area. This is, I believe we're almost halfway through now, so there should be 7 YouTube videos of me talking into a camera that you're welcome to watch, and you can see how the other situations compare to your own. And then the other question we have in the question and answer right now is can the SCRD redirect future funds from our property taxes to the wastewater side, i.e. reduce what we are paying for the Pender Harbor pool? I don't think I fully understand the question. Let me just see if I flush it out. Your electoral area is taxed for the pool. So that would be a service that is provided to the Pender Harbor residents. I'm not exactly sure of who the participants are in that service, but the pool is a recreation service that is provided to the residents, and similar to the wastewater service, the participants of that service are the only ones that can be taxed for it, or revenue can be generated from, or however you'd like to phrase that. So no. Wastewater service revenue and recreation revenue are 2 separate pots of money, and they are independent, so there will be no redirection one way or the other. So another question here asked, was Plan 2 and 3 are identical in cost? What is the real difference? And just to illustrate I'll go back a couple slides here. If I'm able. So that's a good observation, and you can see this is probably the best place to see it initially. So 1 and 2, when we look at a 5-year plan, we're actually have the ability to draw here. So we look at a 5-year plan, we're only looking, in this range here. So that's what's captured by the 5-year rate plan. But when we look at the 2 plans separately, this is Plan 2. You can see the reserve funds are much more significant at the end of the plan. Your increase continues at $100 a year, past $802 to $1,202, whereas this is Plan 3. So it's got the exact same trajectory at the beginning of the plan, and that's why we see, as I demonstrated before, the first 5 years are the same. It's cheaper for a short period of time, but at the end of the plan, we end up encountering this fairly large increase here. So that would be this would be the problem that I see with Plan 3. It generates some inequity where future residents end up paying more because they're paying for debt on the infrastructure. So actually I should probably erase those. Okay. And I think that answers the question. If there's any more questions, or if anyone wants to raise their hand and participate live, feel free. And again, I understand that sometimes this information can take some time to process. A question may come to you after the meeting is over, or you may be on YouTube and unable to participate live. Please feel free to email the email address on the screen there, and we'll answer your question. And if it is a question that um, it generates a response that should be heard by everyone, we'll post as much information as possible on the website there for Lee Bay. So there is no urgency to ask questions, but this is your opportunity now if you have anything or if you want any clarification on the process. I guess one of the benefits of this format of meeting is, unlike in the community halls where we met last time, you're allowed to bring snacks and enjoy them while I talk. I'm going to wait around for another few minutes here in case anyone has a question that pops up. But otherwise, I want to thank everyone for joining us. This was a great participation, and it's good to see people joining and being engaged. Hopefully the smoke clears up here soon, and we can enjoy the beauty of the Sunshine Coast before it turns into rainy season again. Okay, I'm not seeing many questions, and I know sometimes it takes a bit of time to type. I'm just going to start tidying up my things around here, and in the next few minutes, I'm going to shut her off if nothing appears. Thanks again for Director Lee for showing up today. Appreciate having our elected officials participate in these. Also to Shane, the Manager of Utility Services, thank you for taking the time out of the evening to join us tonight. If you have any technical questions for Shane, he may be able to answer them. This is a bit of an awkward format for me. I'm more used to seeing your faces, so I apologize if you feel like I'm cutting you off early. I just don't want anyone to hang out in the awkward silence with me for too long. Okay, looks like everyone's filing out and there's no new questions coming in. So thanks again, everyone, for joining us. Again, if you have more questions, please reach out and let me know. I'm looking forward to working through these problems with you guys and find a solution that works best for everyone. Okay, at this time we're going to be coming off of the live stream.